So how can Thomas say to Jesus, my Lord and my God, in John 20:28, if, as I have always insisted, the Gospel of John is not presenting Jesus as the very God of Israel? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and there's a very simple and a very clear answer to this, and you don't have to go outside of the Gospel of John to explain it. You just need to look at John 10, John 14, and John 17, and what these chapters explain is the mutual indwelling of Jesus and God as their oneness. So, we start in John 14. Philip there fails to realize precisely what Thomas realizes in John 20, because Philip asks Jesus, show us the Father, and Jesus says, have I been with you so long and you have not realized that if you have seen me, you have seen the Father? How can that be? Jesus is not the Father. Even Trinitarians reject the notion that the Son is the Father. So how is it that to see Jesus is to see the Father? Well, Jesus explains, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. There is a mutual indwelling. And because of that, Jesus bears the presence and the power of God the Father. And so to see Jesus is to see the presence of the Father, not because Jesus is the Father, again, but because Jesus bears the presence of the Father. This is the logic of divine images. I discussed this in much more detail in my open access book, Adonai's Divine Images, A Cognitive Approach, which you can find for free if you just Google the title. I also discuss it in a paper I published in Biblical Interpretation entitled Cognitive Perspectives on Early Christology. This explains the oneness of Jesus and God, because if you go to John chapter 10, there you have Jesus saying, I and the Father are one. Not because Jesus is the Father, not because the notion of consubstantiality actually existed already, but precisely because there is mutual indwelling. Jesus is in the Father is in Jesus. And this mutual indwelling is going to be extended to all of Jesus' followers. That's what we find in John chapter 17, where in the intercessory prayer, Jesus prays that all his followers become one with him precisely as he is one with the Father. And then Jesus goes on to describe this as the same kind of mutual indwelling. I and them, and you and me, that they may be perfectly one. The oneness is the mutual indwelling. The mutual indwelling means that to see Jesus is to see the presence of the Father. Philip failed to realize it. In John 20, Thomas realizes it. I am looking at Jesus, and Jesus is bearing the presence and the power of God the Father. So Thomas says, my Lord and my God. Not that Jesus is both Lord and God, but that Jesus is Lord, but is bearing the presence of God. And therefore, Thomas acknowledges both of them. So this is not Jesus being God. This is not the Trinity. The Trinity would not exist until long after the author of the Gospel of John was gone. This is the oneness facilitated by the mutual indwelling, which facilitates seeing God, whose presence is borne by Jesus, which is the logic of divine images. And the extension of that mutual indwelling to Jesus' followers is what facilitates divination, which is why in John 1, verse 12, those who believe in Jesus will be given power to be made children of God, which basically means they will be divinized. They will also become divine. Jesus is divine, they will be divine. Now, Jesus' divinity is different from their divinity because Jesus' divinity is based on the fact that Jesus is the Word, the Logos, which is an emanation from God and is God's very own reason expressed, but they will become divine, they will become gods. And as we see again in John 10, the scriptures refer to humans as God by reception of the Word. So there's nothing wrong with Jesus saying that his followers will be divinized, be made gods, by reception of who? The Word. Not the Father. The Word is not the Father, but the Word bears the Father's presence. And that is why Thomas can look at Jesus and say, my Lord and my God. Not because Jesus is God. Jesus is also not the Father. But if you look at Jesus, you see the Father as well. but because Jesus bears the presence of the Father. It's all about the logic of divine images, and that is the best explanation of John's Christology. It does not require we go appeal to philosophical frameworks that would not be invented for a couple of centuries. It does not require we presuppose univocality with all these other texts that are not written by the author of the Gospel of John. It does not require we do anything but take seriously what the author of the Gospel of John is saying about the relationship of Jesus to God. And the fit for this video has been Hellboy.